Good evening. This is Sue Bola from the Serious Play Conference, and it's my pleasure today to introduce Sam Adkins, the preeminent analyst in the learning game industry, to talk about some of the highlights, some of the surprising highlights that he's finding in the industry and the worldwide interest and attention and investment in our industry, which we should be very proud to feel like we have been important in its evolution. So Sam, I'm going to turn this over to you. Go ahead, and I'm going to audio out. If you have a question, please wait to the end.
Thank you, Sue. Well, good afternoon and good evening to everybody. Today I'm going to talk about the catalyst driving the serious games market. It's a section in the new report, which we'll publish. Serious Play Conference will publish after the Orlando event, as you mentioned. So we've got a lot to cover, so I want to get straight into it. I've been doing the game-based learning market research for almost 15 years now, so I have a lot of longitudinal data. But I've never seen, as I'll show you, I've never seen such, dynamic market like we have today. Again, this is coming, I'll talk about today, basically things that are found in the new report. Metaari used to be called Ambient Insight, and we have a breathtaking view of the learning technology market. I track 122 countries, and we focus exclusively now on advanced learning technology. And game mechanics is one of the advanced technologies we watch. Okay, today's agenda, I want to talk about key findings from the report, but then deep dive into the primary catalyst. And then I want to show you our pedagogical framework, which is a way to not only forecast revenues, but to quantify the revenues if you're a developer. And then as Sue said, we'll do Q&A. When I'm in full screen, I can't see the chat, so that's why we're saving them till the end. All right, the worldwide 5-year compound annual growth rate is quite healthy at 33.2%, and revenues will more than quadruple to over 24 billion by 2024. This is the fourth year that we've revised our revenue forecast upward. It's simply because of the market. I call it a boom phase. The new report has 426 pages, lots of tables, lots of charts, and I've been able to identify over 2,100 game developers operating across the 122 countries I track. There are 3 major sections in the report. A detailed analysis of the catalyst. Today I'll just give you a high-level overview of the catalyst. A demand side analysis and a supply side. Demand side is the buyers. And so I give forecasts for 7 regions, and in 52 countries are called out. They're the top buying countries in each region, and 8 buying segments. Consumer, I break academic into primary and secondary into 3 categories because the buying behavior is much different for preschool than, say, for high school. And then I have an analysis, a breakdown of revenues by package content, development services, and tools and platforms. So here are the growth rates for, this is global, the growth rates for the different types of products. As you can see, the growth rate for custom development services is quite high. Having said that, they're all over 30%, which is very high, a very healthy market. And relatively new on the market is specialized tools and delivery platforms. This is a relatively new, started happening about 4 or 5 years ago, but startups are coming on the market and they're selling, licensing dedicated learning game tools. Now, not to get too preachy, but I don't consider serious games as a subset of the overall video game industry. When Sue and I first started doing this, there were analysts that were trying to analyze game-based learning in the context of the video game industry, and none of them were successful. So I never approached it that way. I watched learning technology, and it's quite easy, relatively speaking. It just takes a lot of time to track the serious game industry if you categorize it as a subset of the learning technology industry. Our definition is that, and this is really similar to anybody that has taken the effort to define game-based learning. It's a knowledge transfer method. If any of you are instructional design professionals, you know there's two phases in learning. There's the knowledge transfer phase, that's the transmission of information. And then there's the learning transfer, which is also called mastery. So we define game-based learning as a knowledge transfer method that utilizes gameplay and that has some type of competition, and then a reward penalty system that essentially functions as an assessment method to quantify whether a player has achieved learning outcome. All right, these are 5-year CAGRS, what we call compound annual growth rates, over the last 14 years. So each one of these represent a 5-year forecast period. So yes, it's a little slightly down this forecast period, 2019, 2024, but you can't use these kind of charts as predictors because this could look entirely different next year. It could be lower, it could be higher. But one thing that could be happening because of the slightly less, it's still higher than it was in 2017, 2022. One thing that could be happening, and I won't be able to tell until next year, is that the market is maturing. And in a mature market, the growth rates always slow down, but there's massive amounts of money on the market. So even if it slows down, it could go to half and there'd still be billions and billions of dollars in the market. Now, this is the gist of the presentations today. I wanted to talk to you about the primary market catalyst. Now, don't get intimidated. I'm not going to read these off because I have a slide for each one of these, at least one slide. And in the report itself, I go into detailed analysis of each one of these catalysts. There are a number of secondary catalysts as well. The rollout of 5G, very fast, blazingly fast 5G networks. They're rapidly rolling out in certain countries, Japan and South Korea. In the United States, there's sporadic rollouts. I saw Verizon rolled it out in 5 cities a week ago, but it's going to take some time. Apple's not going to release their first 5G phone until next year. So AT&T tells me that my new Galaxy 10 is 5G compatible. That's great, but I don't have access to 5G yet. The primary thing that I see is extraordinary amount of innovation. That could also explain the growth in revenues, but I've never seen. I was quite jaded at one time, with learning technology, having done it for so long, over 3 decades. But incredible things have happened in the last couple of years. The advent of augmented reality, VR, mixed reality is what I didn't like that term when I first started seeing it, but that's the term that Microsoft uses. I've written reports on educational robots and AI-based learning, and I watched location-based intelligence closely. But developers are also integrating data and protocols that come out of psychometrics, neuroscience, behavioral science, cognitive learning, and education psychology. I don't know, I was raised in corporate training, and psychometrics is the foundation of all certification training. So it's a statistically sound way to measure whether someone passed that test with no chance that it wasn't by chance. The psychometrics is, I've known very gifted psychometricians, not quite sure what they do, but it's the foundation of a lot of corporate training. So the vendors, the developers right now are integrating that into new products, particularly the corporate candidate assessment games, which I'll talk about. Now, AI, I think of all the innovations, I think AI is turning out to be an extraordinary development across all different types of learning technologies, with game-based learning in particular. Probably the best known AI platform is IBM's Watson. The advantage of using something like IBM's Watson is you don't have to build a proprietary engine, and you only pay for what you use. So if you use a lot of their data, or and you have millions of users, then you might have a hefty monthly bill. But otherwise, it's very quick to hook up to pre-made AI methods. But Watson isn't the only one. I wanted to point out in this slide that there are other ones. Pearson uses Microsoft AI and their products in Asia. Sarago is a very well-known, if you will, as well as anybody's known in AI type learning. And they use Amazon, and then extremely popular game from Montessori for young kids uses Google's TensorFlow. My point I'm trying to make here is all these are cloud-based. You rent the bandwidth, the platform. And I'll butcher the name, Leo Show, which is translates as Lingo Champ, built their own proprietary AI. They teach English language learning to kids in China. But one cool thing about this company is they just went public as well. So that's one of the other, I guess, secondary catalysts is there's the growing number of game-based learning companies that are going public. It makes my job easier because I can get access to quantifiable revenues. All right, again, don't get intimidated by this. As I was telling Sue yesterday or the day before, is the AI experts seem to have a problem explaining it. I know they know what they're doing, but try to get one of them to explain AI in English. Now, IBM prefers, at the very top there, IBM prefers the term augmented intelligence because they stress over and over again that AI is not going to replace humans. We'll have to wait and see on that. To date, AI models, they call them, have to be trained by a human, and then the output has to be double-checked by humans. But they now have AI models that are self-teaching, and that's kind of a scary thing. So natural language processing is the core component of AI-based learning games. Now these are kids. If anybody is familiar with kids that are on the autism spectrum, these kids often have a hard time making eye contact and communicating with other humans. They have no problem communicating with a robot. And if you ever want to see something that's just truly heartwarming, is go on YouTube and watch these kids, autistic kids, sing and dance with robots. These robots are equipped with AI, facial recognition, emotion recognition, and with protocols designed to treat autism. Now, China has a massive preschool industry, if you will. It's overwhelmingly private, for-profit, to the point where they actually call these for-profit preschools educational storefronts. Now, this particular robot is used in 600 preschools, but there are thousands of preschools across China. But this particular robot sings, teaches English, and plays games with the kids. So it's basically uses games to teach kids different things. Now we're back to autism again. Spectacular things going on now. This one, RoboKind, is a Texas company that has developed robots that have actually, based on science and behavioral science, these robots are actually quote unquote trained to interact with autistic kids. Very smart AI-based robots. And then Leica is a French company, and it's relatively simple. Sue was asking me about how much these things cost, and Leica is relatively cheap at $400, but it basically, it looks so simple, but it basically interacts with the children. And the picture there is a really good example of how children react to these new products. Another catalyst is the availability or the rapid rollout of mixed reality learning games. And we define mixed reality as an experience. And it's either an AR or VR. And then within the context of immersion spectrum, augmented reality is the least immersive, and then full, what they call 6 degrees of freedom. If anybody's ever wore a VR headset, until recently, you could only go what they call 4 directions. You could look up, you could look down, you could look sideways, left or right. But now they have 6 degrees of freedom where you can actually go forward and backward in the experience. So it's extraordinary stuff. So AR, there's 2 types, the stuff they use in museums, with the barcodes, for instance, and they have other ways to do it. But basically, when your phone gets within range, and they use these buttons, so-called buttons, chips. So when you aim your phone, the object or the barcode on an exhibit, it projects something on your smartphone. They're using like dinosaur machines and stuff like that. And then there's the stuff like HoloLens that actually projects AR into your actual environment. So standing in your living room and you could be looking at Machu Picchu. One extraordinary HoloLens AR, VR is of the Colosseum in Rome. But it's a Colosseum 2,000 years ago when it was brand new. And so it's one thing to go to the ruins of Rome now and walk around the ruins of the Colosseum. It's an entirely different thing to walk through a fully modern, if you will, model of the Colosseum when it's new. Okay, so mixed reality learning games designed for augmented reality are ideal for certain types of things. And this isn't absolute. These AR and VR can be used for some of these things, but augmented reality is particularly relevant or good for knowledge-based content and skill-based. Early childhood learning is wonderful for that. In my research, I've come across the fact that parents aren't particularly willing or keen on letting their children get lost in VR. They much prefer their children to be out here with us. So the AR they don't have a problem with, but they don't like the idea of a kid putting on a headset and going away. And virtual reality is really good for things like brain training and mental training. Mental training used to be taught entirely in physical locations. So it's based on sports psychology. But now they have these VR mental trainers that immerse the athlete in this 3 days, basically go through all their exercises, mental and physical, in a VR environment. It's wonderful for language learning. There's some really cool language learning products on the market now that are VR. You basically go in, quote unquote, and then you interact, you converse, and interact in these worlds, virtual worlds. One in particular is a really wonderful app is called Mondly, M-O-N-D-L-Y, extraordinary. And they're really good for performance assessment. Basically, you can, track with technology now. You can track what somebody's doing. This is particularly relevant for government and corporate training. And then behavior modification is identical to learning. And I often have to explain that, but this is how, if you look at the Webster Dictionary definition of learning, it discreetly or clearly defines it as behavior modification. So virtual reality is good for this, particularly for things like mitigating fears, anxieties. So the change in behavior, you can get, some of them are completely 100% have the ability to mitigate the problems with certain phobias. All right, now we're going to talk about investment. I've never seen, again, I hate to keep waxing enthusiastic, but the investment being made to game-based learning companies now across the planet are huge. Over $3.9 billion in the last 3 years alone. And here's, in visual, you can see that this is incredible. Now, again, you can't make any predictions about this. Next year, it could be half this, because these kind of charts, investment activity is inherently unpredictable. You can use it for what they call rear view analysis. So obviously, we can talk about what's happened before now, but you can't use these kind of charts to predict anything because, again, investment. We could have a recession. I don't want to get too gloomy, but there's a lot of things could happen that would change this. And to some degree, this spike is caused by these massive amounts going to companies in China. All right. One thing that's happening that's dramatically increasing the reach and the adoption of game-based learning is the global distribution deals. China's Tencent. I believe I'm pronouncing that right, but they have over 2 billion users. They are the largest video game company in the world in terms of revenues. In early 2018, they announced that they were heading into serious games, and instead of making them themselves, and they do make their own games, they're commercial games, they are licensing third-party games. So they've got licensing arrangements with Lego, Age of Learning, which does the famous, the very popular ABC Mouse, Triceum, I believe they're in Texas, and Fishing Cactus is in Belgium. So they're licensing games from international developers, and the reason I'm telling you this is if you are a developer, one way to get into China, probably the only way now, because China's really difficult game market to crack for a non-domestic firm, is to go with licensing, and now to be honest, I don't know how Tencent either found them or they found Tencent, but this is a good way to reach millions of users. Now it's interesting, Minecraft has a couple 100 million users across the planet, but 100 million of those are in China. But in China, Microsoft doesn't charge for the regular Minecraft. So 100 million, but it was all distributed, downloaded for free. Now in April, which is only a couple months ago, Microsoft sold the licensing distribution rights to the education version of Minecraft to JD.com, which is a massive, they call them the Amazon of China. So the revenue opportunities are incredible because there are over 200 million kids in primary and secondary schools in China. So I expect, I will watch this closely, I expect I'll have to update significantly upward the forecast for next year, having watched this. Now this is what we call in the industry validating the industry. I used to work for Microsoft, and we waited till there were healthy revenues in a market before we went into it. Microsoft's major products, PowerPoint, Visual Basic, Excel, those were all acquisitions, and then they were rebranded and obviously maintained going forward. Microsoft released the Minecraft Education Edition in late 2016. Now, the Education Edition, Microsoft bought Minecraft and the company Mojang for $2.5 billion. This Education Edition is another company, Teach for Gaming or something. It's another company in Finland that had built an education mod for Minecraft. So Microsoft bought them, bought the license, bought the game mechanics, And in the first year alone, they had over 2 million users. And by 2019, they had over 5 million users. Essentially, what's happening is Microsoft is doubling their numbers every year. I think, personally, and obviously have a bias towards liking Microsoft, is I think Microsoft opened up the floodgates. When Microsoft buys Minecraft and then buys the education edition and then aggressively markets it across the planet, that's what started, I think, one of the factors attracting investors. When Microsoft goes in, they're all going, the rest will jump in. NetDragon is the second largest gaming company in China, and they acquired Jumpstart, which developed a very popular game, Math Blaster, which has been around in the States forever. It used to be a CD, and then it was web-based, and now I believe they are totally web-based. And then NetDragon bought them, and then the following year bought Sukkicom, which is a very popular math game. And so basically they're buying their way in. It's a massive market now. And then what NetDragon did was created a division called Jumpstart, which is their educational gaming division, if you will. So they're going in big time. Now, I'll never pronounce this one right. I think Daikyu is a South Korean company and one of the largest education companies in Asia. And they bought a company called Nori, I think I'm pronouncing that right, and they develop math games. So for young children, actually. So Daikyu, South Korea, has now, this big education publishing company has just entered the game learning business. Now this is an interesting acquisition. Shoal Games acquired Kiddos in late December last year. Kiddos is a very interesting company. It is a collection, aggregation of games for very young children. And they reach 50 million kids. One of the reasons they reach this is they have licensing deals with tablet companies. So kids tablets, Amazon has one, I believe, Samsung has one, and Curio, these Cuneo, and they developed a licensing arrangement with kids tablet companies, and that's how they were able to reach so many children across the planet. Now, the best revenue opportunity for developers are for serious games developers throughout the forecast period are for early childhood learning games. They consistently rank. I use a free analysis tool called App Annie that allows me to go into any country and then sort the top ranking grossing by revenue educational apps in that country. And early childhood learning games consistently rank in the top 20, sometimes dominating the charts, up to 15, 16, 17 of the top 20 being early childhood learning games. And what strikes me is, with minor exceptions, this is true in almost every country in the world. So this is something you can say is truly an international trend. And we define early childhood learning as games designed for kids under 5. They're quite unique in that they tend to map to developmental stages of kids. So they're basics, basic numbers, basic sounds, basic letters, and all kind of goofy, cartoon characters, etc. A couple of these are very popular. Toka was purchased by, is one of the most popular early childhood learning games companies in the world, and they were purchased by Spin Master in Canada a year or two ago, which is a big toy company. Duck Duck Moose was acquired by Khan Academy. And then Khan Academy just this year, or maybe the end of last year, launched their first branded Khan Academy game for young children. So Duck Duck Moose used to charge for the games, but Khan Academy, following their business model, rebranded the Duck Duck Moose games and gives them away. Now, I would go out on a limb and say the most popular early childhood learning game is ABC Mouse from Age of Learning. Age of Learning, by the way, is based here in the States, and they just released Age Academy or something. So they were targeting very young children at first, but now they're going for grade school kids. So with a virtual world, which is pretty cool. And that's a brand new product. This is what I used to call the content trench. And this has been remarkably consistent, I'd say, for the last 15 years. I have to go in, I don't have to, but I do go into the app stores, the major app stores in every country I track. That's 122. If they have an app store, there's some places, believe it or not, that don't have a commercial app store yet. And in those places, you know, you can't, it's usually the telecoms, MNOs, who are the distributors of games. And you can track the learning games based on their inventory. So the overwhelming amount of it, well, at least 52% of inventory in the commercial app stores are products, games designed for kids. They're apps, if you will, but almost all products, mobile products designed for children under 5, have some degree of game. I would go out on a limb and say something like probably 80–85% are pure game-based. And then you notice that things start trailing off, you know, for the other cohorts. Part of this is because this is consumer buying behavior. And once you get your kids into schools, you know, it's the schools that are actual buyers. And although there are volume licensing deals with, you know, Apple has a volume licensing for the schools, it's actually the schools that are buying it. And so that behavior, buying behavior, is not visible in an analysis product like App Annie. And then at the other end, you start getting, for the older people, one thing that's going on here is a absolutely brand new trend is brain trainers for kids. So these are like the old brain trainers, if you will, but they're designed exclusively for very young children. When you get into, so right now brain trainers are being developed for 2 demographics, for very young children and for those of us over 50, and those are designed, the ones for kids are designed to map to developmental stages, and the ones for adults are designed to maintain general intelligence and basically keep your wits. Now, I think this is, at least revenue-wise, this is one of the major catalysts. It was hard. It's hard. You know, you have to put these guys in some order, the catalysts. But this one, I think, I come from corporate training and education, and there was always resistance to gaming in the corporate segment. And at one time, the inhibitor was that it was expensive, it was time-consuming to develop, and there was also a cultural attitude in corporate, at least in the corporate America, that we're here to work, not to play. So there was always a resistance to gaming in education and training in the corporate segment until recently. Now, the inhibitors are fading really, really fast because there's now rapid adoption of these pre-employment assessment games that are based on psychometrics. So instead of being interviewed by an HR employee, going in, the candidates, potential candidates, take a game, play a game. They can do it from home, from outside, and the games are proving to be statistically much better at predicting performance. So number one, suitability to the job, and a predictor of performance in the job. So having said that, the demand for the demand for game-based learning in the corporate segment, the global corporate segment, is the highest of all the 8 buying segments we track. So the consumers are still the top buyers across the planet, but corporate will be on parity with consumer buyers by 2024, 2025. Now they sell package content that's already designed for particular soft skills, selling in particular. They also provide custom development services for customers, and they also will license their platform for internal use. Now, I've identified almost 40 of these new companies. There's one thing that's interesting about these companies. They're coming on the market, startups, at a rapid rate, and they're attracting enormous amount of venture capital. Now, I'm probably going through this too fast, but one catalyst that's allowing any game developer and game-based learning developer to get to market quickly is the availability of easy-to-use tools and well-stocked marketplaces, basically clip objects, if you will, for selling pre-made objects. Now, the interesting thing about this is their suppliers are marketing these products as to non-coders, and so they're developing these tools and applications and objects that don't require any coding. So you're basically assembling reality as opposed to building it. And the pricing points, for the most part, with the exception of products designed for, say, the military, the government, those still have hefty prices. But on the right there, you see Poly, which I believe Google launched them in last year. It has a massive amount of free 3D models. So you can basically pick and choose. Now, they haven't monetized it yet, although they've indicated they intend to do so. But developers who contribute to this catalog, it's all third-party models and objects. Developers have the ability to lock the models so they can't be edited, but that's up to the discretion of the developer. But if you go on this site, you'll find thousands of pre-made objects. Now, relative to AI, you can also buy pre-trained AI models. Microsoft has a set of them. IBM has a set of them. Basically, you can create an AI, a chat-based AI bot, a chatbot in Microsoft in a matter of minutes. You basically, you probably have to tweak it, but you can upload your FAQ in text form, and they have a tool that will automatically, literally within seconds, will generate a bot, a chat bot, based on your facts. FAQ is what I'm talking about. Now, the interesting thing about doing that is with AI, a lot of companies, banks in particular, are building these AI-based chats, if you will, and they're using their FAQs. But even then, which is an interesting thing, I think, about what a fact actually can accomplish. Credit Suisse uploaded their FAQ to a chatbot, and in practice, they found that it was only able to answer 30% of customers' questions, which, now they got it up to 80% in a year because they kept training it. Well, my point is that a fact, that to me, that makes me suspect that a FAQ goes to the lowest common denominator and is not, yes, it might be the most common asked questions, but it doesn't even begin to span the types of knowledge that's required for customer support. Again, the significance of this is you can get to market quickly, cheaply, and I also see developers that are selling their models, and there are several that I list in the report that actually have commercial catalogs that they sell to other developers. So we developed an educational game framework by reverse engineering successful top-selling learning games. And this is how we pigeonhole, if you will, the revenues for particular types of learning games. So this has been developed by the content domain, like early childhood learning is obvious, and the knowledge transfer method, say if it's VR or AR. And we derive these learning game types, again, by reverse engineering successful products. This year is the first year that we have forecasted 5-year revenues for AI-based learning games. I've said in the last 3 years at my presentations at Serious Play that it was too soon because AI-based learning games are really new, and so it normally requires at least 3 years to basically collate baseline revenues that you can use going forward. Now it's clearly evident that the revenues, are, particularly with the advent of publicly traded VR, immersive is one in Ireland. It's public. The Chinese language learning one I showed you is public.
Show Games is public, but I am now able to forecast 5-year forecasts
for AI-based learning games, and it's the only analyst, if you will, that has done this. Now here are the growth rates. These are not revenues. If you notice, high growth rates are normally, or often at least, related to the fact that they're new product types. So the growth rate is high, but the revenues could be low. That's particularly true for VR so far. The growth rate is the highest of all the 11 game types, but the revenues aren't near as strong as other types. The assessment and evaluation in the dead set in the middle, that has a very high growth rate, but very fast growing revenues because these are corporate clients that are buying these things.
Language learning has a high
growth rate, which, considering how it's such a mature product, but language learning is ideal for, I mean, it's popular all over the world. And then if you notice the early childhood learning, it's just over 20, but most of the revenues are in the early childhood learning. Role-based is when your sales training uses this a lot. You basically are dealing with say a virtual or even another. You play roles. So they do it a lot in business schools in America, where it's basically a simulation where I play a customer and you play a store clerk, and so that looks relative to the other ones like a slow growth rate, but it's almost 15%, which is very high for any learning product type. Whoa. Sorry about that. Let me get to the last slide, Sue. It's Q&A.
This is Sue again. If you would like to ask questions, you may do so now. I don't see any questions, Sam. You must be so thorough that people aren't finding questions.
You know, I raced through that to make sure we had a few minutes to use for questions. So feel free. I somehow lost that last slide. Let me share it again. But hold on. And then I'll share my slides. And this is mainly so you can see he says, hold on, almost there. Do you see that slide?
Yes.
Okay. And there's my email name if you have any questions, just send me directly. But again, the full report will be available. I give my presentation in Orlando on Friday, and then we all decompress, and then on Friday the 26th of July, and then Sue.
As soon as possible after that, certainly by August 1st.
Okay. And again, it'll be under the research button on the Serious Play site.
Yes. I'm typing it in there. If any of the rest of you have questions, you can type on answer and just put them in there. Okay. We do have a question here, Sam. How do you predict revenue since many of the GBL companies don't report earnings?
Well, in analysis, there are several ways that you can do this. That primarily in the United States, a lot of them don't. But the big educational publishers will often announce what they make on their games. Certainly the publicly traded ones are really a good source. But outside the United States, there's a couple of, one way is to basically, like the
M&Os, the telecoms, they will tell you how many.
It's called value-added services. They'll tell you how many subscriptions to, say, an early childhood learning game, but you also know the price of that. So if you know they have 1 million subscriptions and they charge the equivalent in developing economies, they charge the equivalent of 20 cents a day, that's how you start getting baseline data. Plus, I've been keeping track of this for a long time now, and so my archive, if you will, my database, every year we go forward, the data gets tighter and tighter. So I'm as relatively sure as any market analyst can be that my numbers may be lower, but they're not higher.
So the second question here, Sam, about whether or not you include analog games, board games, card games.
No, I only watch digital. I've seen people ask about that, but I don't. My
background is learning technology, so I don't track
tangible, if you will. There are some things across hybrids. Like there's a product called Osmo from that Bijou, the Indian company, just bought for 120 million. But it's basically a hardware bundle that you put on an Apple tablet, which is basically so it's software and hardware. So that's the closest I get to a tangible, physical. And there are a lot of toys that are built for children, and I watch those game-based, but I don't watch the board game per se.
There's another question. Could you give an average growth rate for serious game startups that could be relevant for assigning valuation?
Ask that again, please.
Do you have an average growth rate of serious game startups that could be relevant for assigning valuation? Tough question.
Yeah, well, and I'd say I don't have it, and I don't know how to do that. I've been asked to do that. You know, you'd have to get someone to do, in order to get that, someone would have to do aggregate analysis of startups. You know, startups still have a high degree of failure. I'm not seeing a lot of it in game-based learning, but in order to convince an investor, and obviously startups are convincing investors, you basically have to be able to articulate the return on investment, an exit strategy, whether you're going to go public or whatever. But in order to define, if you were, quantify the value of a startup, you'd have to do a deep dive on the product itself. So that could probably only be done by the individual developer. But I've never seen
any aggregate data on a metric that you can use
in general. I don't think there is a general metric.
I'd like the answer to this question. Do you foresee the establishment of a major game-based learning publisher merging, or one of the existing major publishers entering or expanding into the market in a large way?
Again, it's too soon to tell, but I think the horse has left the barn, or whatever, one of those metaphors. When you see large companies merging and buying, you're not going to see Microsoft merge with anyone anytime soon. But a lot of the smaller, mid-sized game companies, you know, like ABC Mouse, Age of Learning, I would not be surprised if they merge with a peer. It's happening a lot. When in the report itself, I only gave you the top line M&A activity. In the report itself, I identify almost 60 recent M&A activities, and a lot of those are at the local, if you will, level. So they're not all as glamorous and as the big guys going in. But there is a ton of M&A activity going on right now, and it's certainly among mid-level, if not small, companies. So it's happening all the time.
You said no, that you don't include board games. Another listener is asking about voice-based learning games like Alexa.
No, that's a tough one because I know Alexa has they have something called skills, I believe, and so that's a tough one because I don't know how to get to those revenues. So, and it doesn't fit to my learning taxonomy, which I didn't show you today.
So yes, they're game-based.
But it doesn't map to any of my categories that I peg revenues to. So I see them out of the corner of my eye, but I can't shoehorn that into my taxonomy. So I don't know how to, be honest, I don't know how to do that.
Any other questions? Otherwise, thank you very much, all of you, for listening. I'm going to stop the recording here. You will get a link where you can listen to it again, and I hope that some of you will decide to join us for the Serious Play Conference. You want to sign this out, please, Darius? Thanks again, Sam. We really appreciate you sharing with us.
Thanks, Sue. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Closing out now.